form of a transcendental argument is as follows. X is a necessary condition for the possibility of Y, such that Y cannot obtain without X. Furthermore, given that X would be a condition for Y, it's said to claim if Y then X is not merely an a posteriori necessity or necessary truth, established according to natural laws governing our actual world, but it's an a priori and metaphysical necessary truth. In other words, the truth of this claim is not going to be discovered through experience by empirical sciences. For example, H2O is water, but rather these a priori metaphysical necessary truths hold metaphysically, such that X is the condition for Y in every possible world. Therefore, the claim made by transcendental arguments that X is a condition for Y amounts to X is a necessary condition. That condition possesses what's called modal strength. In transcendental arguments, not only is X a necessary condition for human reason or thought, it's a necessary condition for even the possibility of human reason. In other words, even if there were no humans or human thought or reason in existence, X would still have to exist, since X is a necessary condition for the logical possibility of human thought at all. Construct this into a modal argument using what's called S5, modal logic. And here I'm going to ascribe what's called modal operators to premises when I'm actually going to formally represent a transcendental argument. And then I'll provide what's considered a valid argument. The squares represent necessarily and the diamonds possibly. So premise 1, possibly Y. Premise 2, necessarily possibly Y. Is necessarily, if possibly Y, then X. And given axiom K in S5 modal logic, then I can basically distribute this. Necessarily, possibly Y, if necessarily X. Therefore, necessarily X. You'll find someone named James Anderson also points out that in constructing a transcendental argument according to S5 modal logic, as you see here on the slide, when the transcendental premise, which we call premise 3, is expressed as a claim about a necessary condition for the possibility of human thought, then the transcendental argument delivers its conclusion that X is not only transcendentally necessary, but that it is necessary in the broad logical sense as well. Now, that provides one with the strongest type of transcendental argument. Why? Because it's not just true in our world, it's true necessarily in all possible worlds. I'm going to use that for this. Okay, so here, let's just look at the structure of a modus ponens. If Y, then X, Y, therefore X. So let's see when we pop in for the transcendental argument for the existence of God. If knowledge and experience exist, then God exists. Knowledge and experience do exist, therefore God exists. Translate my modus ponens, give it the strength of a modal strength. If necessarily the possibility of knowledge, then necessarily God. Necessarily the possibility of knowledge. Therefore, necessarily God exists. Okay, so let's couple this with another argument, because you're going to want to, in form that seems valid and sound. How do I know that's the unique condition for the possibility of knowledge? So here's the disjunctive. Either A or not A. Not A. Therefore, A. So as far as the transcendental argument goes, either God is a necessary condition or God is not a necessary condition. And then what I'm going to show is that not the case. That God is not the necessary condition. Therefore, God is the necessary condition. Now, that doesn't mean you have to exhaust every possible worldview, because they all boil down to a kind of common denominator as far as a paradigm structure and belief and commitments that is unable to account or satisfy the conditions for the possibility of knowledge. That means you don't have an infinite amount of theories that you have to go through. The disjunction that I'm making is either they boil down to theonomous epistemology, in which it presupposed in the divine revelation of God in order to have possibility of knowledge, or you have an autonomous epistemology. So do you see, autonomous epistemology undergirds all other paradigms. I don't have to go through all the other insignificant details about somebody's religion worldview. Autonomous epistemology cannot account for the possibility of knowledge, but therefore theonomous epistemology. Now, if anything, what the history of philosophy and epistemology should teach us is that man located within his own sphere of reason committed to an autonomous epistemology apart from theistic revelation, like I said, cannot justify the existence of knowledge or establish whether his rational processes are legitimate. Tragically, man, in his pretended autonomy and rebellion against God, is incapable of knowing both the nature of himself, logic, about universals, how all those, what they are, how they can relate. In short, one in a pretended autonomy can't establish a coherent theory of knowledge. That means no beliefs, as I pointed out earlier, can be justified. No beliefs can be justified, and no beliefs attain the level of knowledge, and man is not in a position to know. I'm going to quote a great dear friend of mine, Russell Mannion, summarizes: God is proven not as the conclusion of rational or empirical theistic arguments, but as the very ground of argument itself. It is with the surrender to God's view of himself, the world, and ourselves that one can articulate a coherent theory of knowledge. God's revelation is not validated by some autonomous epistemology. Rather, our epistemology is validated by the revelation of God and the story contained in that revelation. God's revelation is self-authenticating because by it, everything else is authenticated.